actually spent the whole day listening to all the presentations and also the couple of questions and comments made by some of you, and try to summarize it for us. So to say, someone is taking the difficult task to reflect for all of us. So may I introduce you one more time to Dr. Matti Joutsen. Dr. Joutsen is actually originally from Finland. You wouldn't hear that, except he wants you to hear that. And he's a former director of the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, but he's also here today on behalf of the Thai Institute of Justice to provide some summary, what we have discussed today. So, but before we do that, please one more time, give a hand to our panelists. May I request to stay here for the moment? So, and Dr. Joutsen.
Thank you very much, Jost. We have been sitting here for quite a number of hours, and we have heard excellent presentations from very distinguished panelists from 10 o'clock on in the morning. And trying to condense this into just a few minutes is very difficult. I'm somewhat reminded of what happened this morning, for those of you who may have been following the news. The Academy Awards were awarded in Hollywood, a process that took over 4 hours with lots of self-congratulatory comments made by the participants and the MC. But some points had to be made. Some were winners and some were not able to have their voices heard. So I apologize in advance in trying to condense so many very valid, very important points into just a short period of time. There will be some winners in the sense that the points will be made, and there will be some, I wouldn't call them losers, but I would say that they do not receive sufficient time. But I would like to assure you that the report that I am now going to give you is only the very short Reader's Digest version, the one that has just a few points. There will be a more extensive version published by the Thailand Institute of Justice, where we will seek to ensure, to the extent possible, that the rich discussion we have heard today will be properly reflected. So, the envelope, please. Today, the program of the high-level conference, as pointed out already by Her Royal Highness in opening the high-level conference, had a very clear structure. Following the opening by Executive Director Fedotov and Her Royal Highness, we started with a discussion of what challenges there were to the rule of law in Southeast Asia. Then we moved on to a discussion of the implementation of the SDGs and how that can promote the rule of law, and at the same time why the SDGs should be placed at the core of our criminal justice policy. And then in this last session, session 3, we looked at what steps should be taken from here on. What should we be doing? Maybe we should, of course, congratulate ourselves on a successful conference, but we shouldn't leave it here. We should take a next step. We should consider what those next steps should be. During session 1, the participants at this high-level conference discussed the challenges, including different forms of criminality that are prevalent in Southeast Asia, drug trafficking, other forms of trafficking, corruption, terrorism. These were all mentioned. In relation to how these affect the region, how they potentially contribute, underlie conflict, what is the interrelationship between conflict and organized crime, and how they can distort the social, economic, or business environment, and how they can also place at risk the process of regional integration of the ASEAN countries. It was pointed out that the capacity of countries and institutions to address these illicit activities vary significantly. In general, criminal justice institutions, including the correctional system, a point raised most recently by Mr. Brown on the panel, is being overwhelmed. The challenges that hinder or prevent access to justice in the ASEAN region, including, and in particular for members of vulnerable communities, were analyzed. Perhaps we did not go into as much detail in this analysis as possible, but I did pick up that the challenges included the insufficiency of the existing remedies for individuals and communities that have been deprived of their rights, first. Second, gaps in and the under-resourcing of institutions that are designed to provide access to justice. And third, the lack of awareness on the part of persons of what their rights and the possibilities are of seeking access to justice. And here, specific reference was made on this panel to, for example, the poor, the ethnic minorities, the aging. It's nice that also we get some attention in this. But a number of other groups were referred to in this connection. Solutions and challenges to building effective and accountable institutions that allow for the rule of law to be implemented were addressed. It was emphasized that the rule of law is both an outcome and an enabling factor in sustainable development. Several speakers called for a shift in mindset away from excessive reliance on an already overburdened and overwhelmed criminal justice system, and towards what in his morning presentation Dr. Kittipong referred to as a development-led approach to crime prevention and criminal justice. Several participants pointed out that in many cases the criminal justice system was over-criminalizing the actions of members of vulnerable groups, such as women, who can in fact be perceived of as victims. Reference was also made to the need to learn from pilot projects and initiatives in Southeast Asia. Here I would like in particular to refer to the comments made by Her Royal Highness. The possibility of taking these small pilots and initiatives, expanding them, placing them on a national footing, but also seeing whether these initiatives and pilots in one country can be adapted to other countries so that we can learn from one another internationally within the region. Several speakers stressed the importance of instilling a culture of lawfulness, including through education and awareness raising. Turning to session 2, the participants recall the process of how UN member states came to agree in September 2015 on the necessity of including a specific goal on justice, security, the rule of law among the SDGs that called for a peaceful and inclusive society to enable sustainable development, the provision of access to justice for all, and the building of effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And it was pointed out that this was not a done deal. There was a lot of doubt, a lot of questions which had to be resolved along the way. For example, it was pointed out that a large number of developing countries played a key role in convincing doubters of the importance of peace, security, and the rule of law to sustainable development. When compared to the earlier Millennium Development Goals adopted in the year 2000, the SDGs involved the contribution of a much greater variety of institutions and other stakeholders. I will here only have to acknowledge the rich contribution of Mr. Booth. My pen doesn't write quickly enough to get all your points down, but they will be in the final report. He did have a detailed comparison of the MDGs to the SDGs, showing how the SDGs do provide a more comprehensive approach to sustainable development. Various options for how institutions and other stakeholders in Southeast Asia can reposition themselves to ensure inclusivity were discussed, with an emphasis on the attainment of Goal 16. One example that was looked at in greater detail by several speakers, I might mention, was the problems faced by women. For example, the low proportion of women as criminal justice professionals, in particular in senior law enforcement. It was noted in that connection that getting a higher proportion of women into senior level positions was not solely a question of gender equality and rights, but a question of improving the quality and effectiveness of law enforcement and criminal justice institutions. And finally, in session 3, the participants sought to identify, and on this point, Mr. Moderator, I would like to apologize for not being as Germanic as you would like and going a little bit over time. Only 3 minutes, I do promise you. The participants sought in session 3 to identify the key actors in implementing Sustainable Development Goal 16, along with options for encouraging their contribution towards attaining this goal. The presentations reviewed how key actors on the local, national, and international level, including, and please correct me if I am wrong in my comprehensive listing, national and local government, the private sector, civil society, human rights defenders, academia, UNODC, UNDP, UN SCAP, UN Women, development partners, ASEAN sectoral bodies, and AIPA, few. If I did not mention any, please tell me and they will be inserted into the record. We were told how they intend to maximize the impact of their work on Sustainable Development Goal 16. Her Royal Highness emphasized the links between effective, fair, humane criminal justice on one hand and the sustainable development. The two, she noted, were intertwined and mutually reinforcing. Weak rule of law undermines our collective social and economic goals. At the same time, equitable and predictable justice are fundamental in building societies with a stable rule of law foundation that facilitates growth and sustainable development. On both the national and international level, there is a need for stakeholders to emerge from their silos with a focus, the silos being having a focus on their own immediate institutional needs and responsibilities. The need is for them to understand how the issues are interconnected and thus to discuss how the stakeholders can work more effectively in partnership in line with Goal 17. The importance of improving cooperation with and among stakeholders who have not traditionally seen themselves as participating in or even supporting development was highlighted. And finally, future steps that need to be taken to improve the advancement of Sustainable Development Goal 16 were shared with strong emphasis on the need for similar platforms as such provided by this high-level conference. Now, I'll be going out on a limb here, but I would like to see if we can take this conversation forward by suggesting some recommendations of this high-level conference. And I have 6. 1, issues that challenge the rule of law in institutions require continuous assessment in order to ensure that a prevention-led approach is taken and Goal 16 is successfully implemented on the local, national, and international level. 2, particular effort should be made to ensure that the formulation and implementation of national and international policy is guided by awareness of how decisions taken in one sector can contribute to progress in other sectors in implementing the SDGs. 3, and this refers to the morning discussion, a mapping of ASEAN priorities and sectoral bodies such as the Senior Officials Meeting on Transnational Organized Crime and the ASEAN Senior Official on Drug Matters that are relevant to the implementation of SDG 16 should be undertaken in the near term and shared with ASEAN countries and the ASEAN Secretariat. 4, as a party to these ASEAN bodies and to the Mekong Memorandum of Understanding, the UNODC should represent SDG 16 to these fora and explain the connection to these sectoral bodies and frameworks, and they should consider aligning their plans so that they can contribute effectively. 5, a roadmap, there has been reference to an Asia and Pacific roadmap for implementation of the SDGs, but separately I would suggest that a roadmap and plan for implementation of SDG 16 in Southeast Asia should be considered, and relevant national counterparts should be made aware of, engaged in, and contribute to the process so that their contributions and progress can be tracked and assessed. And finally, like I said, I may be going out on a limb, but I do not think that this should be a one-off event. Consideration should be had to having a similar conference, perhaps 1 year down the line, with similar stakeholders, perhaps bringing in more stakeholders, so that we can see how we are getting in this work. On that point, I would like to conclude the report, and speaking as a representative of one of the organizers, the Thailand Institute of Justice, I would like, first of all, above all, to thank Her Royal Highness Patrick Mahidol for graciously opening the high-level conference. I would like to thank the UNODC for having co-organized this together with the Thailand Institute of Justice. And certainly I would like to thank the distinguished panelists. I think this has been an extremely rich discussion, one that we have spent a good day, the day has been very well spent, and I am sure that the report will be very well received. I would also like to thank the MC, Ms. Jane Holloway, and the moderator, Mr. Jost Wagner. Did I get the term correct? Thank you. The graphics recorder, Joy Sukumal Surichamorn. I really do must say I appreciate her artistic skills. And I'm a little bit sorry she's off there on the sidelines, but I've seen you have been very busy during the break showing your graphics to the audience. And finally, I would like to thank you all, the audience, for having participated so actively in this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Matti. So I get assigned no word? 1 minute? So 1 minute by one of the two organizers behind this conference, Professor Dr. Kitty Pong.
Okay, thank you, Josh. As the traffic outside is still very bad, so I probably it will ease up within the next 1 minute. So I would like, on behalf of the organizers, UNODC and TIJ, to thank every one of you who have participated and made great contribution to this high-level conference, which I believe that it will be a landmark, sort of. After 2 years of the adoption of SDGs, this is the first time that we come together to share our experience in trying to push forward this Goal 16. And I think we have spent lots of time discussing about the way forward. So TIJ would be very committed to work further, to explore further on these issues, and we looking forward to working closely with like-minded member countries, institutions, or individuals who believe in mainstreaming SDG to criminal justice and crime prevention. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, and for those of you who've been traveling far, I hope you have a good trip back home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veretan Kitty Pong. This concludes our conference. Thank you very much. See you next year.